Hello, welcome to Ashby. Richard calls this Ashby. So I always think Ashby's on the other side of Prince Street, but maybe that's just me. And if you're not from Cape Breton, I'm just talking gibberish. My name is Ian, and today we're talking about Richard MacKinnon's Making a House a Home, a company housing in Cape Breton Island. This is an interesting article. I mean, a lot of it is the history of how these buildings came to be, how this particular part of the cultural landscape that emerged. But this is a good place to pause for a moment and think about the concept of space and place. Space and place is an idea that sort of comes out of cultural geography, and folklorists use it a lot, material culture people use it a lot. But basically it's the idea that there is space, there is the objective reality of geography, whether that is the natural geography of literal landscape and trees and mountains and coastline and so on, or whether that's the constructed landscape of the urban setting, of found architecture, as it were, of mass-produced landscape, highways and apartment buildings, in this case company housing, but also university residences and prisons and dormitories and apartment buildings and all sorts of things. And how do we convert these things into places of meaning? And that's the place part of it. Space is sort of the objective reality. It's like looking at a map from above. And it's how seeing everything works from your own particular perspective, from sort of this bird's eye view perspective, how all these pieces fit together. It's objective. It's the kind of thing that's scaled. And place is subjective. Place is how this landscape relates to you individually, and how you find meaning in it, how it goes from being a street, over which you have no control. You didn't name it, you didn't lay it out, most likely, unless you are a city planner yourself. But it is a place that has meaning. It's a place that has a history. And we do that in two different ways. The first thing we do, of course, is we take narrative control over it. We take these mountains and we take these rivers and lakes and we give them names. We name them after what we think of them, what we think happens there, or we name them after important people in our life. Of course, we can therefore exercise a remarkable amount of power when we do that, when we name things after our history and erase perhaps a history that was there before. So when we take Unamagi and we call it Cape Breton instead, or we take who at one time were our cultural heroes and people of esteem, like Cornwallis, and we start weaving their name into the landscape as if that is an inevitability, and then change the history of that place. Change the history of that place in terms of the meaning making, and make it ours. Because there is a competition that's present in space and place. There is this idea of when one names landscape, one claims it. Hopefully one's claiming it in a positive, constructive, community-oriented way. But just as often, one can be claiming it against someone else. Go to a place, rename those places. Erase that history, create your own history to it. It's part of it. We always want to sort of recognize that there is the bitter and the sweet when we're talking about these concepts of space and place. So, one of the things we do is we name it, and we narrativize it. We take these places, and those aren't distinct moments, but they are interrelated moments, and these become sites of our history. They become sites that we claim on the grand scale, of course, and then it's marked by the history of by the pattern of us naming it. We events happen here, and we name the event after this place, or we name the event after the particular historical figures who were active at this place. But also on the very personal level, this street is meaningful for me because this is the street where I learned to ride my bike. Or this is the street where in that car over there, the car that was parked right over there, I had my first kiss. Or this street is meaningful for me because my family has lived here for 2 or 3 generations. And even though I don't live here anymore, I've done it. So space and place is about reclaiming landscape. And the second way we do it is by changing it. I mean, we certainly take landscape and we put fences over it. We clear little areas, not in a devastating way, but we perhaps build a home there. We till it. We turn it into agriculture, and we live within it and create a sort of subjectivity. And then with built places over which we have no control, originating control, we often customize them. So, he makes this point in that so in urban contexts, unlike sort of in the sort of classic folk society model, we're not necessarily in charge of our own residences. We buy houses, or the houses are supplied by some kind of manufacturer, because it's just the nature of contemporary living in contemporary urban spaces that they're constructed ahead of time. They're commercial investments on a large scale. Property has entered into a particular form of contract, and so I don't need to explain urbanism to you, do I? It's not this wide open space. It's already part of a capitalist enterprise, and claims are made to it, and there's the idea of creating sort of yield. And the benefits, as sometimes debilitating as they can be, the economic benefits of mass production. We're not going to build a house and then another house. We're going to build the same house 50 or 60 times, and voila, that is what it is. That's what a house is. And so we move into these neighborhoods, and he gives the history of how these neighborhoods came to be. The steel plant opened in 1901. The steel plant is from this direction that way. It's no more, of course. It hasn't been here in the better part of 25 years. I think it was razed to the ground entirely in 2001, and much of it had already disappeared by the time he was writing this in 1998. And that's where Open Hearth Park is. But right around there is where the steel plant was, dominated the Sydney landscape for almost the entirety of the 20th century. And you have workers. So the population of Sydney went from tripled between 1890 and 1900, simply in anticipation of that being built. And these houses were built in 1910, 1920. I'm on Richmond right now, and parallel to me is Victoria. 1 block over behind me is Victoria. And as you read in the article, there's 2 slightly different kinds of houses on Victoria and the word I just gave, the word that's over on the sign, Richmond. Right, so it's just as sort of a bit of an example. Most of the Richmond houses are the sort of more square ones, the flat sides, and they are duplexes side by side. This is an odd example of the Victoria Road style house. Right there, I gesture, I'm pointing. Victoria Road style house, which has like the peaked roof in the middle, and hence there's different geometries to them. But they constructed these houses, and even though they constructed them, the steel plant built these houses, and in order to house families of workers, and no matter how much they did, there was still a great demand for them. I think over the figures are eluding me right now. I'm sure I have them written down here, but something along the lines of they had about 150 houses all told, not in this neighborhood, but over again in sort of Ashby and so on, and they were still the demand far exceeded the supply. And they have people moved in. People had these strict houses, and these houses were built by the British owners of the steel plant. Fundamentally, they were built according to expectations, and Cape Breton families didn't necessarily congregate in the same way. And in this neighborhood, it mainly was people from other parts of the island. This isn't Whitney Pier, which attracted a whole bunch of immigrants from Europe and the Caribbean. These are largely people who would have come from, say, Inverness County and so on. Ironically, the same counties that this neighborhood is named after. The streets Richmond, Victoria, Inverness, and Cape Breton Street are all named for the 4 counties of Cape Breton Island. And so this strange configuration of a house isn't necessarily how Cape Bretoners organize themselves. Because what is a house is a really interesting question. Sort of nice, not really a definition of it, but it's one of those sort of mandala thoughts. Le Corbusier, I believe that's how it's pronounced. He had this idea that a house is a machine for living, and that it's a mechanism in which the functions required for existence happen. There's the very practical ones. So there's it provides shelter. It provides a place to sleep. It provides for the storage, the preparation, and the serving of food. It provides for, I had some other ones. Yeah, it applies for washing. It applies for, maintaining the body and keeping it clean and so on. And, I obviously identify certain rooms. And it also has the social functions and a machine for that. Basically, the socializing spaces, the places to reaffirm one's community, one's family, through living rooms, dining rooms, formal occasions, semi-formal occasions where certain things are celebrated, where the routines of the day, the routine performances of the day are passed around. And so the floor plans didn't quite correspond. You know that cliche about Cape Bretoners always just they always going to congregate in the kitchen? These were tiny-ass kitchens and sort of more formal living rooms, because that was much more a British way of a family being organized. But we had however one wishes to trace the actual history of this family organization in the machine for living. That's not how Cape Bretoners congregated. So the houses never quite worked. In the late 1940s, these were no longer sort of rental properties, and people were actually able to buy them. And this is the Sydney example. There are company houses all across the island, and they are related much more to the mines. You go to Glace Bay, and you just go to almost any street in the neighborhoods, and you'll bound to find a street where all the houses are fundamentally the same shape. In the late 1940s, as I said, they started being able to buy them, and once they were able to buy them, they were able to modify them. They put in basements. They started repainting them. They decorated them in different ways. They changed the windows. They did all those things that renovate, in part because they're houses and they needed improvements, or they are houses and they needed repairs, and while they were being repaired, they needed improvements. But basically, it's I can now convert this thing even more so than this mere decoration that I would have been able to use. Convert this more into something that really constitutes a home. The subtitle of this is Making a House a Home. How do you take this objective reality and turn it into something? And you can actually renovate. You can start to, and you'll see the modifications. And certainly it's really fascinating in the side-by-sides, because you have two homes that are essentially two houses, just to be precise, two houses that are essentially meant to be mirror images of each other. And then over I guess this is a century now, that they've existed, they have been adapted. Wind porches have been put in the front, fancy railings on the stairs. Overall adaptation in order to fulfill the expectations of what constitutes a home. So this is what we do with houses. When we have control over them, and they eventually, 20, 30 years into the home's existence, when they're finally available for sale to the employees, they were able to be adapted in more constructive ways. And there's some really interesting sort of things that aren't present in his article, but writings about all these people were very good with steel. And so they were able to take steel, sometimes literally take steel, but they're able to take steel and do ornate things with the railings. They were able to introduce a rebar and some really solid work that they were able to reconstruct these houses into very solid things, in part through the introduction of basic steel to it. So, but before that, they had decoration. They had the same thing that you might be doing if you live in residence or if you've moved into an apartment, where it is a generic space, and you adapt it through things as simple as posters, through the introduction of personal objects of memory, mementos of home or experiences or missing persons or absent persons, that you take this blank slate, this space, and you create a place in it. And so now, ironically, we have these things that are fundamentally concessions to the idea that employees need a place to be when they are not at our mill. They weren't built out of a sense of goodwill. We have a workforce. We need to house them. We're going to house them in the cheapest way that we possibly can. We're not going to be in a process of consultation. We're going to create these homes in the manner that we understand these homes to work. They didn't quite work, but they worked well enough, and there was a community that got built around. There's fields that could be used as a commons for pitching of horseshoes or grazing of small domesticated animals like chickens and even sheep, if I recall the article correctly. And so, things happened here. And through sheer force of will, they were able to create something along the lines of home. And on top of that, all of a sudden, well, not all of a sudden, that's the wrong term for it, over time, these places, these homes, went from being, again, these just concessions to the capitalist enterprise of industrialization to icons of place, icons of Cape Breton. So you can now find company houses as things like Christmas ornaments or watercolors, line drawings. And so they come to represent, especially now that the industry is gone, but so many lives filtered through here that it becomes representative of this place, this heritage, a heritage that isn't defined by ethnic background, and it isn't defined by particularly expressive performances. It isn't like a fiddle. It isn't like a lobster. It's defined by a fairly humble abode, where the humility of the abode is transformative. It is experiential, and it is something that they can change from space to place. There's a really interesting new collection of Nova Scotia graphic artists. They put out a book called Nova Graphica, and one of the people who also edited the book, whose name, of course, I forgot to write down before I left home, she has this wonderful 8 or 10 page comic about company houses, and she actually cites Richard's article quite extensively, and I'll see if I can link to that. It's not really available online, but I will get you something along those lines. Richard's article is a really interesting take on this space and place phenomenon, and it's a useful mandala, again, for grasping the creativity and the ingenuity with which people take something that they have no choice in. They really fundamentally have very few options and create meaning therefrom. So, this has been Richard MacKinnon's Making a House a Home, company housing in Cape Breton. As always, I am Ian, and as always, I wish you nothing but the best. Take care.